From SBI's Executive Briefing Center in Dallas, Texas, the most watched and listened to content in B2B sales and marketing, it's the SBI Podcast with your host, Matt Shares.
Hey everybody, I'm Matt Shares. Welcome to another episode of SBI TV. Today's guest joining me is Mike Dickerson. Mike's the CEO of ClickDimensions. And if you're not familiar with who ClickDimensions is, they're the marketing cloud for Microsoft Dynamics. And what Mike and I are going to talk about today is from the CEO's perspective, how should I think about data? And specifically data from a commercial standpoint. What's the data I need? How do I distribute it? How does my team use it? What's our cadence? How do we iterate? What's too many feeds? What's not enough? Total spaghetti plate, and I couldn't think of a better guy to come and help us sort it out, especially knowing as we've all just worked through 2020 staring at data from our homes and we're trying to figure out how do we get back on the other side. So Mike, good to see you, man. How you been?
I'm great. It's great to be with you, Matt. Always enjoy the conversation and come away with a few new ideas.
Yeah, well, likewise. So Mike, it's always good to see you. And I think one of the things I like about you is you have an appreciation for what it's like to be field-based, and you do it from the seat of the CEO. But maybe before we jump into the show, Mike, can you just give us a little bit of background on ClickDimensions? How should the audience think about Click? Where might they be bumping into Click on a day-to-day basis? And perhaps they don't even know it.
Sure. ClickDimensions is the leading provider of marketing technology and services for people who use Microsoft Dynamics. We have about 3,500 customers in 76 countries. Our applications fall into three areas: tools that influence prospects along the buyer's journey, analytics that measure sales and marketing activities as they impact pipeline and revenue. And I'm excited to say we're in the alpha stage of launching a set of data applications to improve personalization and lead generation. There are probably three things that make Click unique. Our applications are 100% native to Dynamics, so everything works on one data platform, which is key. No integrations or syncing. Everything that we do is services enabled, because most of our companies need a team, not just a tool, and we are laser focused on results. We obsess about data-driven analytics to help companies optimize activities that drive revenue.
Perfect. Well, Mike, good to see you, and thanks for being willing to come join us and help us sort out some things for some folks that are our listeners and viewers. So what Mike and I are going to dive into in this first section is we often get a lot of questions about data cleanliness, how do I use it, what are the right components? And I thought what would be interesting is not only does Mike have a commercial background from his previous life, but as a CEO, he's looking at his own data, but also based on the CEO, the company that he is the CEO of, he is living in it every single day. So that makes him supremely qualified to teach all of us, including myself, what we should be paying attention to. So Mike, let me start, I guess, just to set the baseline. If you think about digital disruption, which happened to everybody from a commercial standpoint, go-to-market standpoint last year, where people were saying, okay, now I don't have a choice. Now I've got to be more digital, both with my clients and with my employees. If we think about the client side, if you think about just the basics of being a CEO, what information do you feel like from a CEO perspective, every CEO should be looking at? And then kind of what's that cadence that they should be looking at that data?
Yeah, and Matt, I would throw one other thing into the mix. About a year ago, I took over as CRO of the company because we were going through a transformation. Our business was shifting from a very heavy indirect channel to direct. So we got a head start on the kind of transformation that a lot of folks had, or that everybody had to go through when this pandemic took place. So I can speak with a little bit of understanding, specifically that I think is helpful from a CRO or a CEO perspective, and a few thoughts here. I mean, the word data is so all-encompassing. There's a lot of different types of data, and when you ask what's most important to look at, I actually think that one of the things that be helpful for companies is to think about their data system. And let me talk about why that is. It's so you can make sense of it when you're a CEO, because you're switching gears between your product team, your finance team, whatever. And somebody says, we have a data problem. What the heck does that mean? There's customer profile data, customer behavior data. It's easy to get completely overwhelmed. And I think companies are overmatched a lot. And right now, with all the changes going on and the importance of it, which I can explain in a minute, you either need to invest a lot in people and tech to get things normalized and organized, which is kind of what we do. And as you said, we're in the business, so we get benefit out of it. Or you need to, get a system that is sort of all is already integrated. Yep. I think there's a huge relationship between process and instrumentation that is, an ugly reality. And there's a huge opportunity of somebody who can simplify it. There are two things that we focus on that are related: demand generation right now and operational revenue. And those things are both heavily impacted by the changes that COVID has wrought.
Okay, good. So then, Mike, how do you, when you think about the processes that need to be put in place to just ensure that people have accurate data? So I always sort of think about if you think about the hierarchy, like number one, do I have the right data? Number two, am I getting the right feeds? Number two, is it clean? Then we'll talk later on in the show about kind of how to activate and different forms of activation. But if you think about those sort of first 1 and 2 components, am I thinking about that correctly from your perspective? Or would you guide your peers to perhaps have an alternative point of view?
I think you're thinking about it in a great way, but I would distinguish two parts. I would distinguish demand gen from stuff in the pipeline, and here's why. On the demand gen side, especially in COVID, customer profile data and enriched data really matters. Couple things. First, I think pretty much anybody has gone back to basics, and they're focusing on existing customers, and they're looking at segmenting who are the best customers, who can they lean on the most, going back to sort of major account programs and things like that. So you need to make sure that the contact data, the business data, all of that stuff stays clean and fresh. Right. And that you're expanding the number of personas in those accounts. Why? Because those also are not only important for your existing customers, but they're important for lookalikes for new customers. So when it comes to customer data, it's a hygiene issue. Constantly updating, constantly, refreshing, and it's easy to let the stuff get out of date. The second area is the operational data. And this one is actually harder, I would argue, because to be able to figure out, first of all, I have a belief that everybody's going to have to invest more in the top and the middle of their funnel these days. So you really have to drive productivity in the bottom of the funnel and get better conversion rates and faster times at stage. And to do that, the tricky thing is you have to get consistency in process. You have to get consistency in definition so you can actually measure stuff. So I think the top of the funnel is really the demand gen part is a data hygiene issue. The bottom of the funnel is process and instrumentation.
That's good. That's good. That's very good. Okay, so let's kind of move into the next segment, Mike. So let's assume, and I'm leaping, but just for fun on the show, let's assume we've done what you said relative to process and the instrumentation. Talk to us about cadence and channel. How, as the CEO, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, versus which feed? How do you think about that? I've even got a point of view at how I run SBI, and it's evolved over time. But I'd be keen to hear your perspective, because you've also ran some large organizations.
Yeah. So, and again, this is just sort of the way I'm sort of wired as a systemic thinker. I try and make sure that, especially if you're building an organization at scale, that if the smallest activity is really optimized, and then you do a lot of them, and then you roll them up, that it's all sort of good. So the thing that I kind of obsessed over was the frontline sellers. And a couple things that we do is we really focus on, if any of your guys out there are cyclists, I kind of call it Strava for sales. I want to be able to give the sales athletes, the frontline sellers, whether it's BDRs, your hunters, your CSMs, whatever. I want to give them the information so that they can see the stats that really matter to them, their activity rates, their conversion rates, their time at stage, those type of things. I want them to be able to, I want the computer to be able to monitor those things on each deal that are important: activity, relationship response, and those things. We know that sales is an activity business, and what gets inspected gets perfected. But the approach that we take, and why I focus so much on the frontline sellers, is that if you let the machine do the inspection, and for us, we've got over 2,000 deals in our pipelines, our managers can go back and be coaches. First of all, you let the frontline sales athletes be adults and not feel like they're being managed by kindergarten cops. And you let those sales leaders really be coaches. And so I know that if the system is working, for each deal and it's working at scale, that I know that I'm optimizing productivity. So that's kind of how I look at it from a sales execution standpoint. I think it's a different question how you look at it as a CEO. And I think right now it's a really good question to sort of dive into. What should a CEO be looking at right now in this, which isn't that operational level? The CEO should be looking at, how do I adjust my investment mix? How do I get more money to the top of the funnel? How do I, in this moment, focus on those customers where there actually is potential to generate money? And I think, the couple of the big things that we look to that are definitely in the CEO's camp: unifying sales and marketing. The alignment of the polite friends between sales and marketing, that doesn't work anymore with the need for efficiency and with the need for a seamless customer experience. And that is not going to happen on its own. The CEO is going to need to be involved in that unification. And the second thing is the reallocation of spend. How do you get more money into the demand gen part of the funnel? That's an important thing in today's moment.
Mike, it's interesting. If I would submit this to you, one of the things that we've seen over 2020, and now that we're into 21, with lots of new optimism as the month changed from December to January, and people were able to smile a little bit more. The focus on a couple things. Number one, on back to base and taking a much more hyper segmentation focus, especially with large enterprise clients who have what I always love to keep it simple. They have an available nickel of $1 that they could have, and they're not really sure how to map from a nickel to a dime and a dime to a quarter. They don't understand which buying center. If they figure out the buying center, they don't understand the motion. And it's almost like running a truncated new logo campaign into an installed customer. And people, we're clunky. As an industry, we're just not that good. So we've seen a couple things. Number one, for the product-led growth companies that are thinking product-led, where the product's going to do the heavy lifting, you still have to come up with the right offer and the right use case, and you have to figure out a way to leverage marketing. People are still under leveraging marketing back to base. Second item we're seeing, and Mike, you mentioned this, and just to emphasize, is taking the commercial spend from marketing all the way to client success or customer success, choose your vernacular, looking at that dollar. So if I'm spending, 28% across my functions of marketing, sales, and customer success, random number, what's the yield I'm getting and how am I calculating yield? And people have historically, in the old enterprise model, I got a bunch of sellers out in the field, there wasn't enough tenacity with looking at it that way. And we're seeing that reallocation, more emphasis on marketing, squeezing in the middle, and much more tenacity on that success function, bringing sellers who actually sat in the field organization and dropping them into a client services role, getting more alignment and thinking about teams of two, right, if you will, so people can co-create. It's almost like, if you think back to your consulting days, Mike, like it's almost when you're in my business, you're always sort of co-creating with a client, right? You're never sort of dropping in. Enterprise organizations are having to model some of that behavior. So I don't know if you have a point of view on that.
Yeah, I've got 2 points. One that I think is kind of fundamental with, look, every stakeholder in a buying committee is crazy busy, They are zoomed out from running from one Zoom meetings to the next Zoom meeting, and they're bombarded by more messages. Thank God, because it drives up volume for companies like us. But people are trying to figure out how to get to folks. Sure. And so the seller, in my opinion, has to be both a concierge of the buying process and a curator of the information. There's just too much noise out there.
Love that.
The second thing, in a second, I'd love to tell you a little bit about what we did. I don't know that it's funny, you mentioned our past lives together where I ran a business that only sold to the Global 1000, right. And we learned some tricks about those selling teams. And we borrowed some of them and have brought them into our business, which sells to a much smaller segment. And it's kind of interesting. Happy to share some of what we did.
Yeah. Well, Mike, so good point. I think in this last segment, I know one of the things that people struggle with, and you probably have a point of view of this, not only from your operating background and as a CEO, but from what you all do at ClickDimensions. How do you get cross-functional alignment across data? Like, how do you make sure everybody's singing from the same hymn book and not moment in time, because we have a quote meeting, but on a rainy Tuesday and a sunny Thursday, and the ability to interact across the same fact base? Because I would tell you, a lot of people, well-intentioned, traveling with the wrong data.
Yeah, and there's nothing more just frustrating to have an executive meeting and you've got half an hour allocated and you spend the first 29 minutes arguing over whose facts are right.
Oh my goodness.
Anybody who's been through that, it's just mind-numbing. So let me tell you what we did and then where I think things will ultimately head. We have the benefit of any problem that we solve.
Right.
In this domain is something that we can package up and sell either as a piece of software or as a service.
Sure.
So we can invest more in this space. And that's a luxury that we have. We have, the way that we've solved it is out of our business systems group, we have 3 people who do nothing except work on, core systems from CRMs to, the probably 12 different pieces of sales tech that we have and so on. And we're lucky because everything that we do runs off the same data model. That's part of being built native. So we have 3 people in sort of a business systems group, but we have a marketing operations person, a revenue operations person, and we have a customer operations person, all of whom are familiar with the data models and who are great with the underlying data systems and with tools like Power BI. And so essentially, we've got the better part of 6 people just working on things. So that's number one. Yep. The company that can figure out how to simplify that, is going to make a lot of money. To simplify it, you need to get to a common customer data platform, and there are a couple ways to do it. We are built natively on Dynamics, Dataverse, and Power Platform. So that's our strategy to get there. Other companies, use a BlueConic or a Lattice or something like that to get to a customer data platform. That's another way to get there. But it's it's not an easy task.
I know. So Mike, let me hit you with this as we wrap up the show. If you think about maybe your biggest learning as a CEO when you walked into the job, as it relates to data and just like the operating the business to where you are now, what would that be, and provide some coaching to your peers?
I think I have a much greater appreciation for how difficult this domain, the data domain, is. And I really saw this when we bought a data analytics company and we actually had to make data analytics products. And I saw how difficult it was to harmonize and reconcile and normalize the data. Is that, I look at this as most companies are overmatched. Even bigger companies are overmatched by this challenge. And I wish I could give a simple, there's this just magic simple thing to solve this problem. And I think it does, if you're big enough to be able to afford the investment in staff and in getting to that common set of facts, it's worth doing, and you will blow your peers away if you've got the money to do it. Otherwise, if you can figure out how to go with one of the providers out there, and there are a bunch of them that are trying to put together, revenue clouds, and where things are already integrated, go with that, because ultimately, the folks who do have that normalized data and are speaking with the same set of facts, I think they're going to be the ones who are going to be the accelerators.
Yeah, I would build on that, Mike, and say my learning is data cadence drives data insight. So what do I mean by that? If you have a regularity relative to how you run the business as the CEO, it's less about saying, I'm missing this piece of data, and I'm missing this piece of data, and I'm missing this, versus what's your operating cadence? We run daily huddles every day. That's how we operate the business. 10-minute stand-ups, and there's always a data point. And the data point we look for is somebody on your team, if they're stuck on one of their 3 or 4 quarterly objectives. And they say, I'm red on whatever it is. As the CEO, my number one job is to get stuff out of the way for my team. Take that same approach as it relates to pipeline, CAC, EBITDA, trend line, whatever the case may be. And something that my CFO and I focus on is our data cadence drives data insight. There's always imperfect data. Ours isn't perfectly clean, but we feel like we've got a pretty good rhythm relative to how we do our operating calls that bubbles things up quickly to allow us to spread that, go to a problem and try to solve it, and just get a little bit better. So,
I think just looking back at our experience, we did that same sort of thing. We have certain numbers calls on Friday. We have pipeline reviews a certain way. We have monthly growth meetings. Yeah. But here's what ended up happening for us. Is a combination of the two. Was we'd get into those meetings and we got into the damn, our facts aren't right. And so it forced the two of them put together, forced us to do that. But I think what you said is actually keeps you from the science project, which is if you are always driving from what data you need, what to run the business, you protect yourself from multi-million-dollar science projects where people try and over-engineer things.
No doubt. Well, Mike, thanks for, you're always so generous with your insight and your time, so appreciate you tuning in. I wish I could see you in person, but this is the next best thing with you on the big screen. So continued success, my friend, and I know we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, everybody. Hopefully that was helpful. Mike was very kind in offering his perspective as we all get better, right? It's not getting perfect. It's getting better and avoiding those science projects. One thing I would leave you with is if you think about Mike's insight at the top, talking about process and instrumentation, if you don't have a revenue growth office, that is a gap in the strategy, and here's why. The revenue growth office, that's the infrastructure. It's the equivalent of standing up a finance function when you start a business so you know what's happening. So every commercial team, regardless of size, should have a revenue growth office, pipeline, forecast, key KPIs, revenue operations. That is the central fact base to run a great commercial strategy. Until next time, I wish you good luck as you try and make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on the studio, SBI's Executive Briefing Center, our team, or to schedule a workshop, please visit salesbenchmarkindex.com.